I'd have a problem with an advisor that would look at, say, like Brian's scenario and say, well, my commission on an $1,800 repair is going to be X, and I can for sure get that commission. But if I try to get that $5,000 total repair, which is what it's going to take to fix that thing properly, and they leave and don't do the repair, I don't get my commission. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting, thought-provoking episode of the Jaded Mechanic podcast. My name's Jeff, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on this journey of reflection and insight into the toils and triumphs of a career in automotive repair. After more than 20 years of skin knuckles and tool debt, I want to share my perspectives and hear other people's thoughts about our industry. So pour yourself a strong coffee or grab a cold Canadian beer and get ready for some great conversation. So, Brian, you kind of had we're talking about your, I don't want to call him your apprentice, one of your fellow employees at the other location.
Yep.
Kind of dropped the ball today. It's kind of trying to wear maybe too many hats.
Yeah, we've had it's a long story. My wife has been working out at our other location for about a month. And I just, I'll mention things here and there, and she'll say things like, this, just in passing, because, automotive isn't really her first language. Automotive, she's out there just, helping with some paperwork and stuff. And I'm like, man, that sounds not like kind of what we're shooting for. I have to head out there and do some diag work a lot. So the past 2 days it worked out. I was out there about 3 hours yesterday and about 3 hours, probably closer to 5 hours today. Now that I think, I was there from about noon to 5 today. Yeah, one of the trucks I was out there for was, the truck I had told you about. They had the transmission out and couldn't figure out why it was all neutrals after they had put the transmission back in, and didn't realize that the transfer case shift lever had gone to the neutral position.
Right.
Which, as a country boy who grew up with locking hub Fords, is probably the first thing I would have checked if my vehicle didn't move forward or reverse. I probably would have looked down at the little lever. But, I'm a little old school. I used to run that lever with my right foot when I took my foot off the gas pedal, because I was too lazy to reach down and hit it. And, it's just been interesting to go through some stuff and watch what's actually going on with him in the position trying to wear too many hats. And he doesn't need to be wearing all those hats. I have a guy out there who I took to TST in New York City that is by no means a diagnostic whiz whatsoever, but I'm relatively sure if he would have put Hayden on the why does this truck not move, I'm relatively sure that I probably wouldn't have been involved with it. Yeah, you wouldn't have to leave your shop when Jim's already not there, right? So things are kind of going a little hectic at your place to go over there to just I needed a break from our place too, though.
Okay, yeah.
So that worked out. That worked out good. I've been struggling a little bit with the front counter there. It's
just too bad maybe nobody thought to just say before you make the drive out there, is the shift lever in, neutral?
And in his defense, I could have asked that, but that's an assumption that I guess, is that like a generational thing? Am I becoming old?
How long has it been since we've had manual T cases?
Well, I still got one of my Wrangler.
Yeah, I forget. I didn't get rid of my manual T case till November of 2016.
Well, I think, we make a lot of assumptions. You've been doing this a long time. There's certain things you just check as second nature. If you don't, it doesn't occur to you that, yes, I checked this. That's, that's good. And you move on. It's autopilot.
Yeah.
And I think there's, we're real good. I know for myself, I'm real good at pigeonholing myself. I will jump to the most complex possible thing it could be before I check fuses. Before I make sure it's plugged in. Hey, is the ignition on? Does it have a battery?
It was actually funny. I had to call Matthew Skunrick because he's always talking about how ridiculous it is that he has to put missing fuses in. I said, I finally got one that beat the missing fuses, buddy. The missing freaking didn't put the lever in the right spot. He's like, are you crazy? He's like, you're lying to me. I'm like, buddy, if I'm lying, I'm dying.
Yeah.
This is real auto repair. And I think it's a good thing too. Like, I think that, I think stuff like this happens more than we probably think. I just think that there's a lot of people that are afraid to admit the downfalls of maybe themselves. And don't get me wrong, like I've freaking anything under the sun I've screwed up. So I'm not trying to act like I'm better than anybody. I'm just saying that I think there's a lot of people that would be afraid to admit that the shop that they work for that's so prestigious could make such an error. You know,
it's something
that
they'll
learn.
Yeah, it's something that they'll keep as a little haha in between us joke, right? But you know, or it's not like people are, and it's probably a good thing that people aren't going on the internet in the groups and going, "Oh my God, you can't believe what my blank tech did today," right? I mean, we're sitting here discussing it. We're sitting here discussing it with kind of as a preface to positions and people and where they fit within the machine, right? But I mean, I don't think anybody's throwing shade at anyone, but I think that there's a lot too many times, like you'll tell this when this story gets broadcast and everybody's going to just laugh and go, oh yeah, I've done that. Or, oh yeah, I remember when, John did the same thing. Haha. Like we have to keep it all that if more people would be honest with the mistakes that they've made, right? This industry might be a little more welcoming. I mean, you can't tell me anybody in the room that I'm sitting in right now hasn't started at least one car on fire. Like, come on. I mean,
Define, does it have to be a sustained fire or can it just be a small burst of flame?
If it requires the fire extinguisher, let's call it a fire. I'm not talking total losses.
Guilty.
Yep. So
look at Eric's got them shifty eyes.
Right? So,
I contributed and created. I mean, I'm multitasking with that sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's not one a year for me, but I mean, it's
more?
No.
I had one in my life, and we've joked about it. It was at the shop I work for currently, and it wasn't like it was a bizarre thing. Me and another guy hit an older Jeep, like a 98 Grand Cherokee with some starting fluid to try to get it going out back. And turns out it wasn't a fuel issue.
It was an ignition wire issue.
And it turns out it was not a fuel issue. And it actually had ignition, but I'm guessing it must have been timed incorrectly because it was backfiring and banging or whatever, right? And we had sprayed it or whatever, and it backfired and banged. I go, okay, this thing's going to have to get dragged in the shop. And Chris got out of the car. He was cranking. I was spraying. And I go, okay, whatever. And we hung out there for
qualified to be an astronaut?
What's that?
What qualified to be an astronaut?
Yeah. And so we walked away, and like 10 minutes later, it was in the summertime, and we have a west-facing door. We're near the Niagara River. The wind comes out of the west, and I can smell plastic burning. And I look out back, and the grill of this Jeep looks like it's at the freaking tractor pulls. Like, oh shit! And we still have it on security camera. I freaking ran full stride. I had a fire extinguisher carrying it like a football, and I leaped over the hood of a Chevy Cobalt.
Whoa.
Full stride, 350 pounds. And we showed it to somebody. They're like, man, you got to get him down to the stadium. He should start for the Bills. Yep. But So I've started one on fire. One and only one. Yeah. Usually with big mistakes like that, you only have one.
It's our good friend Paul Danner had a Jeep catch on fire too, right? So I mean,
yes, he did.
If you haven't lit up a Jeep, have you really been working? Are you really anybody if you haven't lit a Jeep on fire?
Oh, what if you were a contributing factor? I just remember very early on in my time at L&N, I walked into my bay. Tanner was down visiting. Lucas and Tanner are in my bay, leaning over. Hey, just BSing. Oh, by the way, truck caught on fire at the gas pump. Right back to talking. It's like, oh, how'd that go?
Pump. Pardon?
Yeah. But yeah, no, mine was a welding. Did you know oil vapor will actually ignite?
Yes.
That's how waste oil furnaces work,
Yes.
to be precise. Yep.
My old boss was cutting an exhaust out of a car and right through the edge of an oil pan on I think it was a VG30 Maxima. Just weld it up. I'm like, we don't want to do that. No, it'll be fine. Weld it up. I'm like, oh, okay. So I put on all the safety equipment that time, but like, the plug's out, oil cap's off. I mean, it has somewhere to vent if it goes. Yeah, that was insufficient.
Yeah. That's amazing.
That was an afterburner flame out of the bay, and just, yeah, that was a good day.
All the safety equipment, I love that.
So,
well, I always wear the mask and gloves, but I usually am not putting on, the jacket, the apron.
Mask and gloves are me really stretching it that day. Typically, it's barehanded, and if I'm just using the MIG welder, the 110 jobby that plugs in, I'll just squint.
Yeah.
And usually, I'm just getting somebody else's broken bolt out, so it's not like I'm working for extended periods. It's like 23 seconds,
My first week in the shop, I flashed myself bad enough that I was out on comp for about 3 weeks. I will not play around with the welder without the mask anymore.
Right.
That was
I think if I had that experience, I'd probably feel the same. But
that is the
worst
on the pain.
It's horrible. Yeah, I've heard it's horrible.
It makes a toothache feel like a pimple. I mean,
really?
You move your eyes. When you get something in your eye, you move and you can feel it dragging. It's like that constantly. It doesn't stop. Nothing helps.
It's like sand.
It's just time.
It's horrible. I think that if I had ever been through that, I probably would do the same. I'd probably have the mask on. But
yeah, I can deal with the burns on my hands, but my eyes, that was discomfort. That was some discomfort.
I could imagine. So we grew up at my house. We grew up with a welder in our house, right? Not in our house, but in a legit stick welder, 220 that had a separate service run for it because my dad did some millwright work, and I learned to weld with a stick welder when I was, I don't know, probably 10 years old. And
nice.
I remember the first time I had my own, I'm living in my own house, and I still got the old man's old welder in the garage. It's in the garage right now. Plugged in, still works. I broke the handle off, so I had the adjustment handle. I got a pair of vice grips. I had to get it calibrated, so the vice grips are aimed to the right spots. But I still got it. And I had a friend that needed a trailer tongue extended, and there was a lot of cutting and welding work, and it was really hot out that week in August. And didn't I run a 220 stick welder in flip-flops and shorts and a t-shirt? And so I couldn't imagine that feeling being on my eyeballs.
Yeah.
Because I welded for 3 hours like that, and I couldn't rotate my ankle. I couldn't put socks on. I had to take 3 days off of work. I couldn't put socks on.
Oh yeah, that's straight up sunburn. Yeah. We used to all look like Tony the Tiger in the welding pits.
Right.
Yep. Palm Springs, middle of summer, you really don't want to wear leather or Nomex.
Mm-hmm.
But as we started plumping out from sitting on our ass 10 hours a day doing nothing but, high frequency welding, you stand up and you have Tony the Tiger stripes.
Right.
Half of it's ghost white and the rest of it's second degree burns. Just UV burns.
Oh my gosh.
But
That's
I mean,
horrible.
you adapt. I mean, I'm real big on safety stuff just because of the times I wasn't, and it bit me. Piece of welding slag going down the inside of my boot is
oh, that sucks.
You
yeah, you got to learn to get your
dance.
Boots off. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's talk about not pay. Let's talk about ratios, or the topic. The question kind of came up. You guys probably remember seeing it a few weeks back. Should an advisor ever make more money than a tech? And I mean a tech, not just any tech, but say like an established tech. Your top tech, your foreman, for example, right? Maybe, but that kind of somebody like say Eric in Eric's position at his shop, right? Or Brian at your shop. So should the advisor, we'll say Dean, Brian, should Dean ever make, the kind of money you make?
Well, I think that it's hard to make the comparison. And I think what you run into is there's different levels of technicians and different levels of advisors.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to say that, should an advisor make more than a technician, I think that the whole thing, I think it's hard to make that judgment as a very broad statement because there's advisors that sell, 20,000 worth of work in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And there's advisors that struggle to sell 20,000 worth of work in a month. There's technicians that turn 65 hours or whatever, whether you want to measure it in hours, whether you want to measure it in, build labor, whatever you want to measure it. There's guys that, we'll use hours that turn 65 hours a week. And there's guys that turn 27 hours a week. Mm-hmm. There's guys that have a shit ton of comebacks. There's guys that don't have a shit ton of comebacks.
Right.
There's advisors that sell jobs properly with all the information. And there's advisors that, kind of they leave this out and leave that out. And they
check noise in car.
What's that?
Check noise in car.
Yeah. Well, and not just that, but in the actual selling of the job, they create a number in their head and maybe they don't present the whole, the score of the whole automobile to the customer. And they're just going to grab and go on some money without, letting the customer know what they have coming up. And that's kind of a bad look on the shop. So I've thought about this. I can't remember who asked the question, but I saw it in the group. I saw it asked, and I don't even think I actually responded to it, which is odd for me because I'm the first person to be like, hey, listen, you moron or whatever. Right. And I just thought about it. I took 10 minutes and thought about it. And I was like, I don't even know how to answer this.
The general consensus seemed to be a lot of people felt that the techs have a lot more invested in training, tooling, wear and tear exposure to chemicals, wear and tear in your body versus the service writer, right? Whereas a service writer can kind of, if you've got the people skills, you've got the kind of soft skills, the tech can change a little bit on the vehicle, but what makes you a good service writer, good salesperson, remains pretty much the same, right? No matter whether we're, I guess what I'm saying is a guy that could have sold, points and tune-ups in your dad's 74, Ford F-100. That same kind of characteristics and people-pleasing skills can transfer into somebody selling Diag on a CAN problem on a 2021 Toyota.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I guess something that has changed in the industry, though, is the way diagnostic work is sold and presented, due to the fact that the cars are so complicated as compared to what they were in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying guys in the 70s didn't charge for diagnostic work. They certainly did. I don't think it's as far and widely accepted as it may be now.
Yeah.
I also think that, remember they had those big, like the big Sun machine or the Interrogator, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like a flat fee. Like, we're going to hook your car up to the Interrogator. It's going to be $53 and we're going to tell you what's wrong with the car.
Yeah.
And, most of the time they likely could, right? And I think that aspect's probably changed a little bit, like trying to educate the customer on why, we're going to spend hundreds of dollars on telling them what parts their car needs before we actually put a part on. In some cases has probably changed a little bit. So I think there's been a little bit of an increase in skill, but I would have to agree that it has changed far more for the technicians than it has for the writers. I don't think anybody who spends their day seeing what goes on in the bay could make that argument unless they really wanted to be oblivious. And as far as that goes, the tooling, the tools and the softwares that the service writers have access to have actually made their job a little bit easier, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Now, Eric, you've written your fair share of service, right? And kind of fill us in on that. Yeah.
So yeah, you bring up some good points. I think there's a lot of evolution on both sides. I think, as techs, we have a lot more, it's a much more dynamic environment. Things change a lot faster. We have a lot more to keep up with. I think the worst part for me personally of being an advisor, I enjoy people. I enjoy helping people. I can't, the type of work it is, it's very psychologically stressful. I think comparing techs to writers is a really tough argument to make because it simply is not the same job. It's not the same position. It's not the same workload. We've got a pretty intense mental workload to go through, especially if we're going through, an intermittent problem, a noise concern, something like that, something that is intermittent, not real apparent. But we don't do our job to basically ruin people's days. I mean, it's a horrible way to say it, but we're not giving people good news when you're on the counter.
No.
Certainly not.
And that takes a major emotional toll on the person doing it. Being able to empathize, being able to listen, and being able to, relate to the person without sounding callous or without sounding uninterested. That takes a lot of mental effort, and it takes, for me, it takes a big toll. I understand how devastating it can be to hear, oh yes, you need to spend $10,000 to get your car going again, to have it safe and reliable. That would be a world-ending announcement for me. I can only imagine what I'm doing to someone when I'm telling them that. Especially if it's a college student, single mother, whatever. And I try not to let that impact how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to approach every vehicle the same. I'm going to, when I'm on the counter, I'm going to straight report. This is what you brought in.
Yeah,
this is what I found. Yeah. This is what's wrong. This is what I need to do to resolve it.
Transparency is so key, right? Transparency is so key. Like it
has to be. You have to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to know, well, were these guys wrong? Did these guys screw my car up? I can't tell you that. I can tell you what I have in front of me. There's a cut valve cover gasket. How did that happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
Can I surmise it was probably poor install? Yeah, but I can't say that. I wasn't there.
Yep.
It could have just easily happened pulling it apart. It was baked onto the head and it tore.
Little Felpro trolls came out at night and cut your valve cover gasket.
Brian and I have talked a lot about that, how it's sometimes it's really hard when you can see kind of because I think when we do this long enough, right, we can see almost, you can picture in their head exactly how their repair at the other's repair center went, right? You can see it. You've had your head under there. You kind of know, okay, I could see how that gasket got cut when he put it in there because he probably didn't take this bracket out of the way and,
Yeah, in a lot of cases, you can see how it went because we've made the mistake before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And oftentimes, if they ask something like that, I'll be like, man, I don't know, but I can tell you I've had the same thing happen to me. So
that's the
best. I just kind of shrug my shoulders.
Yeah.
What are you supposed to tell them?
Yeah.
It's my job to report what's wrong with the car. It's not my job. And it's tough in my position because I see a lot of it and it gets depressing. It gets very depressing. And I don't get depressed. I don't get depressed when I have a car that, like I have a BMW right now with an insane steering lock issue and that I haven't even had time to I haven't had a chance to put time into because you can't steer it. So I had to get some roller skates to the shop. I think they finally got there today. They were on loan. And, I don't get depressed about stuff like that, something that's like super complicated. But when I get a Chevy pickup in that's got a code for the throttle body, the fuel tank pressure sensor and, a couple other things, and it's got all new parts on it. And I find the 5-volt ref wire that's rubbed through where the, harness turns a corner coming off the PCM. That's annoying, It's annoying. It was a lack of caring to even
do the job
take
properly.
A multimeter and check some voltage, and that's frustrating.
Definitely that advisor then that sold the work and the parts that it didn't need, you could make an argument that advisor might be just as bad for the industry as the tech that misdiagnosed it, right?
Oh, I think part of that, I had an advantage that I'd worked in the back before I went up front. And it's the same thing with Lucas. He's worked the back. He's worked the iron.
Yeah.
So it there's a lot of cross-checking that goes on. But I think, as someone, like both of our advisors now are decent. They have a base of knowledge, but it's just that. It's a base of knowledge. They don't know if what we're telling them is sensible or if it isn't. It's up to us to make sure they understand, at least basic operation, why it's doing what it's doing, and why this is the reason it's not working properly, and why this will fix it.
I've seen my experience at the dealer was a lot of the time I would have a lot of advisors say, when a car like that would come back, for example, and get handed to another mechanic, right? And the mechanic would go and fix it. Somebody like Brian's position or myself, the service manager would be like, well, why did this happen? And the advisor, the first thing they would say is, it's not my job to argue with the mechanic. The mechanic just brings me the estimate and says, sell this. That is how they took it, is that's my job to sell that. And I always, that was a tricky line for me to walk, right? Because I want an advisor that sells and doesn't, emotionally discount, doesn't worry that, because if we're all being honest with what our goal is when we're looking at that car and trying to repair it and sell it, is we're trying to sell the repair that the cars need. So I don't want an advisor that's going to be like trying to trim that. But at the same time, how does the advisor, if you've got somebody that maybe shouldn't be doing that job, or, commission-driven sales pay structure maybe makes them get a little happy with the pen. Who do we blame for that? Without blaming the pay structure, is there a point where the advisor should be saying, no, that's not cool?
Well, I think the advisor, the most important job you have is to advocate for the customer. It was explained to me very early on in my career, and I didn't necessarily follow this a lot. I didn't subscribe to it, and I've kind of taken a fresh look at it. If I'm going up to a writer or an advisor with a repair, if they understand it, and I can sell them on it, and not as, a sale per se, but if I can help them understand why, the what, why, and how, they're going to understand how the system works. They're going to understand the repair. They're going to understand, why we need to do it, as opposed to just, well, it's not my job to argue. No, you need to understand what you're selling.
Yeah.
You need to understand what you're explaining to the client. So if they ask questions, you can at least give them a reasonable answer or find the answer.
Sell it with confidence, for sure. Yeah.
Advocating for the people that are trusting us with their vehicles if we're not doing that, we're not doing our jobs properly, in my opinion. It's what's best for the client.
Do you think there's a situation where maybe the tech has done the best he can and even brought the advisor out and showed them what's broke in the system, and the advisor gets... I think that you brought up a great point, Eric. It's our job to advocate. It would be our job as the advisor. I say our. I don't really work the advisor position. However, it would be the advisor's job to advocate for the customer. I 100% agree to do what we can for the customer. But I think some advisors, when they hear advocate for the customer, they get emotionally attached to the price of the job.
Yep.
And I have a situation that I'll explain that happened this week. It's a Transit, E250 Transit with EcoBoost in it, twin turbocharged, right? Customer's complaint: on the gas pedal, makes a loud squealing noise, and it's got no power. Check engine lights on. Bring it in. It's got low boost code. Both the wastegates are seized on both turbos. The driver's side manifold, the studs are broke off in the back. It's the whole back of the head's black.
Yep.
And so that's the driver's side manifold. And then the passenger side turbo with the inlet tube off, I had somebody brake torque it, and it dumped about a cup of oil out in about 6 seconds out the inlet side of this turbo. I go through all this fan. I look at the rest of the thing, the brakes, the ball joints. It's actually, other than this turbocharger issue, it's in surprisingly good shape. So I bring the advisor out. I show him. I say, this turbo pukes oil. This manifold, you're going to end up taking this turbo off anyways.
Yep.
We're in the rust belt. You ain't putting this turbo back on, and the wastegate's seized.
She's 2 turbos.
Got 2 seized wastegates, 1 junk manifold, 1 turbo that's puking oil. Showed him the seized wastegates. Can't move them by hand. Put not a vacuum pump, but you got to set a pump to pressure at that solenoid hose, and it should move them. And it does not. The wastegates are seized. So day goes by, and I'm walking by the front counter, and I see this paperwork. You know, when the stuff prints out, we're still on old-fashioned printout work orders. When the stuff prints out, you can see what a sold job looks like because there's a bunch of parts on the sold job. And I look at the top, and the number looks kind of low. And I find out that he only sold a passenger side turbo and the associated hardware and pipes and nothing else. And I said, hey, what's up with this? Oh, well, that job was just so expensive and everything else and this, that, and the other thing. I go, so let me understand your logic here. Your logic here is that you don't want the customer to have to spend too much money. So what we could do is charge them just the diagnostic fee and return to them a broken car. Mm-hmm. I said, but what you've decided to do is charge them nearly $2,000 and return to them a broken car. Because spending $5,000 for a fixed car is too much money.
Yeah. That's not advocating for the client.
No, it certainly is not.
So now I'm in a position where I have to put a stop to it, say, we're not doing this. Mm-hmm. This is not happening. And, people think that advocating for the client, and a lot of people do it because our society is so money driven. Well, that's too much for Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones, she can't be spending $5,000. She, $1,800 we can do, but $5,000, it doesn't matter. Mrs. Jones is going to get back a broken vehicle, and you're going to take $1,800 from her. Yeah. That doesn't work for me. I didn't grind my ass into the dirt 13 years building this place, so you can charge somebody $1,800 and give them back a broken car.
We don't get to make that decision what they can afford. That's absolutely not our call to make. All we can do is
100% not our call.
Half of the time when we think that they can't afford that other $2,000, they wind up spending $2,000 somewhere else, right? And then she'll go. So they get more money spent.
She'll go trade that sucker in and put $7,000 down on the next one. Yep. Which, it's a 2015 Transit. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's the customer's problem. If somebody told me that my 2015 Transit needed $5,000, I would drive that thing to the dealership and I would take $7,000 and that car and put it down on the next one to haul my kids around. I don't blame her. Yeah. I don't blame her if she does it. But my thing is how do we, I think that advocating for the client has to be not just the dollars. It's got to be
their best interest.
Their best interest with that vehicle. A lot of times, my boss, Jim, he's great. He advocates for the client by telling them, you need to probably get rid of this car and get a different one.
Oh, absolutely.
All the time.
Yep. We probably have 2 a week like that.
Yep. You need to get rid of the car. This is not going to make sense.
But
a lot of times it's the other way. A lot of times people see $2,000-$3,000 and it's like, well, listen, what can you buy for $2,000 or $3,000? Mm-hmm. There's nothing out there.
Well, you can. It's going to have, another $10,000 worth of problems you got to fix.
It's going to be just as broke as what you got.
A lot of your coaches, though, will tell you that you should never tell your customer that they should flog it, that they should get rid of it. That it's they talk about you wouldn't know the emotional attachment they may have to that vehicle, right? It could have been their father's, and
them coaches are from the South. When I can feel the carpet from the bottom side of the car, it's time. I'm not gonna advocate for you to. I'm not going to convince you to put a transmission in when I can feel the carpet from the outside of the car.
Yeah.
Well, and that's you don't necessarily approach it that it's not worth fixing. It's the cost of this repair is going to exceed the value by a lot, or this cannot be made safe.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
This absolutely cannot be made safe to be operated.
Yeah.
That's how we will generally approach that. I mean, it's not, it's just not worth putting the money into. That's all, again, not our call. I don't get to decide what a client or what an owner can actually afford to put into their car. That's their call. I don't know their financial situation.
Agreed.
I just know what's wrong with it.
Yeah. I'd have a problem, I guess, with an advisor that would look at, say, like Brian's scenario and say, well, my commission on an $1,800 repair is going to be X, and I can for sure get that, right? That commission. But if I try to get that
commissioned
$5,000,
that's how stupid it is.
Yeah. But if I try to get that $5,000 total repair, which is what it's going to take to fix that thing properly, and they leave and don't do the repair, I don't get my commission. And I've seen too many times where the technicians in a flat rate or an incentive-based pay schedule, they always seem to get labeled as that aggressive sales. But yet too many times it used to irk me, and this is why I'm on the fence, but I used to say there's no fargan way that an advisor should ever make as much money as a tech, because I've seen too many advisors that just they sold whatever they were told to sell with no regard to whether it actually fixed the car or not, because they've got a quota to hit, they've got a number to make. And too many times the tech got painted with these brushes of, they're con artists, they're ripoffs. And I've seen it more times than not. It's the person on the front counter. There'll be the situation in the dealers where there's a known offender of, over aggressive sales, over aggressive cannot fix a sandwich. And they'll come out day after day with an estimate for a tune-up and a fuel system cleaning and a flash update, and it's not going to fix the car. And
I've been doing this 40 years. I know what I'm talking about.
And they sell it, and that car comes back and it gets handed to me a lot of the time.
Somebody else.
And I'd go and fix the car, and it was like Groundhog Day every day. It would happen over and over again every day. Yeah, Brian, you talked about... It
never does change, does it?
Brian, you talked about your story. You told me how many times your dealer job you quit because your advisor wanted to sell a fuel system cleaning instead of an ignition repair.
Right? I took I was working waiter day, and somebody that was traveling was stopped in, and we had an opening on the schedule, and they had a Mustang. It was in the summer. They were traveling. They had a Mustang. They were from out of state, maybe Pennsylvania or something like that. And it's hammering big time, number 7 cylinder. So I pull the ignition coil out, because it's blue car syndrome. It's a Ford. It's misfiring. It's got coil on plug. It must need a coil and a plug, right? And I was right. I pull the ignition coil out, pull the plug out. It's got a big old carbon track down the side of the spark plug, and you can fly a freaking 747 through the gap of the spark plug, and it's still got the yeller paint on top. Yeah. This thing's got like 135,000 miles on it. I go, okay. I go, this thing needs this coil. I go, it needs this spark plug. I said, it really needs 7 more spark plugs because this car ain't gonna.
Has never had
this. Ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
And I presented that, showed the advisor. He gives me a sheet. What did it have on it? No approval for the coil. No approval for the coil. Approval for 1 spark plug and a fuel induction cleaning. Because guess what? He gets bonus $10 off of every one of them fuel induction services he sells, but he don't get bonus $10 on an ignition coil. And that was like the day.
Something's wrong with that.
And I walked in the service director. The service director wasn't there. And I was chirping pretty hard Monday morning about it. It was like the heaven hell week thing, And so I was already 3 days in. And then I had to come to work Monday for another 13-hour shift. So I was already pissed off, and I was chirping. Because, when you're a big guy, you can chirp.
Yep.
And I got called in the service director's office. And I'll never forget it. Terry was his name. Terry goes, I had a lady call me up and tell me her car never ran better after we sold one of those induction services. I go, well, I freaking hope so. You sell 37 of them wallet flushes a day. I hope one of them made a difference.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you're freaking selling 150 of them a week. You're bragging about how somebody called you up and told you the car runs better after the place been in business for 20 years and you've been selling 150 a week, and that was
one phone call.
One phone call on how well the car ran. And that, and that was that turned into a big deal because I went to parts. I got an ignition coil. I told Joe that worked in parts. He goes, there's no coil on here. I go, put one on it. And I shipped that car. I did not fuel induction service it. I put an ignition coil and a spark plug in that car, and I went up to the front and handed it to Russ. Russ was the service advisor, and I said, I did not fuel induction service that car. And he looked at me like I had a third eye. And I said, we can talk about it if you want. And I think he could tell I was irritated, and he preferred not to go into seclusion with me and talk about it.
The bear.
And he sold it. He sold it that way. And that was the point where I decided that this is not for me anymore, and they would do it all the time. Some little old lady that runs the casino and back could come in there with her Lincoln, 4,200 miles. Oh, time for your fuel induction service. On a port fuel injected car.
Yeah.
A port fuel injected Lincoln that doesn't have, I've never had a carbon issue on a port fuel injected Lincoln in my entire life.
No.
And, it's just, and it all comes back to, I think, what I mentioned. There's too many people doing the jobs too many different ways to paint with a wide brush and say techs should make more than advisors or advisors should make more than techs. There's too many shitty advisors. There's too many good advisors. There's too many shitty techs. There's too many good techs.
Absolutely.
And it gets to a point where it's like, after you've worked in the industry long enough, quite honestly, if we found an advisor that was an absolute rock star and treated the clients well and everything like that, and that dude had to make a couple more bucks, and I didn't have to be freaking, at my wit's end, I'd be like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm doing okay. I'm making enough money to do what I want to do. And if, you find this guy and he's Johnny Great Advisor and he does his job great and there's not all these loose ends and I'm not making 5 phone calls a day to customers and ordering parts and writing tickets myself, I'm all about it, man. Yeah. It would not bother me.
To find the money to keep that advisor.
Yeah.
It is commensurate with skill and experience.
Yeah. Yeah. If you brought me an advisor and they're out there, and they're well compensated. I'm sure some of them are making more than I do. And I don't have a problem with that.
Just like the superstar techs, if you have a good individual, regardless of their position, you're going to do everything you can to keep them.
Yeah.
Eric.
Yeah.
If it's someone that fits with the culture, that does their job well, that, has that credibility, you're going to do everything you can to keep and retain them.
Yeah.
Did you see a similar scenario like that, Eric, when you were at the dealer to what Brian just described, or is it?
Oh, I hated the dealer. I have an unfortunate habit. I say what's on my mind. I don't play the politics. If I have a problem with something, I'm going to say it, usually the person. I was never really one for running to tattletale with daddy that so-and-so hurt my feelings. So, I've said a couple times, my entire reason for staying at the dealer as long as I did is the training.
Right.
I hated the environment. I took a massive pay cut going over there. I don't work well in a flat rate environment. I never have. I'm more interested in fixing vehicles than steamrolling out, induction services.
Yeah.
And, so you found that your experience there kind of mirrors Brian's, that necessarily the advisor wasn't the best advocate for the customer.
Ours was a combination of advisors and service director.
Okay.
And GM. It was New York City. It was the only game on the island. So they kind of felt like they had a monopoly and they could do whatever they wanted. But they, they just had some very, I don't know if I'd say deceptive, but definitely not ethical approaches to doing a lot of things. But there's always, like every dealer I've ever worked in, there's those 3 or 4 guys that are banking 120, 130 hours a week, and the rest of the crew is starving.
Yeah.
If you hit 40, you were having a rock star week.
And it was,
but it was all on, spiff services, quick maintenances.
Yeah. And it was weird. I always saw it, and I could not wrap my head around how it happened, because it wasn't supposed to happen, that certain customers wound up with certain advisors that got certain techs that got those big kind of tickets. And it always used to, it was the most amazing coincidence. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was just like, this guy always seemed to get this type of car with this type of service sold on this type of customer. And I was just like, man, I just want to fix cars. Like, I just want to solve problems. Yes, the money is great, but I mean, if whoop-de-doo, you did, 4 transmission services and 4 fuel system services by lunchtime and you made 8 hours. Like, wow, pat on the back. What, like, did you fix anything today? No? Okay, cool. So if I took those machines away from you next month, what are you then? Are you still a mechanic? Or are you just like a glorified quick lube kit? Well, it's not helping your career if you go down that road, just chasing those spiffs or that pay. But I found that, and it wasn't just one dealer I worked at. It seemed to be a trend, is that some coach somewhere has taught some service team that, you got to sell this amount to make this we need to hit this number. Okay. Well, we roll in the BG equipment or we roll in the Valvoline equipment and we start selling all that stuff. That's great. You've all heard me say it, I've never seen an over-maintained car. But, I mean, at some point... But if somebody like my mom could come in and have every intention of trading that car within 6 months, but some advisor that doesn't necessarily know that or doesn't even care is still going to say, oh, it's your 84,000 kilometer service. You should be changing your timing belt. You're flushing this, flushing that. And they just go, okay, I better do it. Right? What's that achieve? Well, people make money. But it doesn't.
That's all it achieves.
You're not advocating for the customer at that point, right? You're just advocating for your
green eyes
incentivized pay plan.
Yeah.
So I have a problem with it when it's always people want to say it's always the techs that are doing that. Like, I saw more. I don't want to use the word rip off, but yeah.
It's a mix. You have to look at, like you said, they've got quotas they've got to hit. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, come hell or high water, you're going to hit this number. Yeah. A lot of that, in my opinion, starts at upper management. The principal, the GM.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They're setting that. They're setting that precedent, and they're going to put in the most cutthroat SOB they can. Mm-hmm. Parts and service. Any dealer I've worked at, parts and service, they don't see it as anything other than a liability and a pain in the ass. Yeah. It's a necessary evil to keep the franchise. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I've never worked somewhere that was happy they had a service department other than when, they needed their stuff worked on.
Just
which ironically was never the same line that we sold.
Isn't that magical?
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, it's the greatest car that they've ever sold until it's out of warranty, and then you have to give that customer an estimate for the transmission that's out of warranty. And then that salesperson is telling that same customer, yeah, those guys in the service department, they're a bunch of jerks. Like, they should cover that for you, Goodwill, because you're such a great customer. You bought 4 cars from me in the last 10 years. Like, you're a great customer. Like, and so
how many times does that happen in the independent world too? Oh, I'm sorry, I put this guy on it. I should have put my best tech on it instead of this guy.
Well, that's a whole other issue of people. How many times do they want to actually, when they say, well, this went wrong or that went wrong, how many times do they put their hand up and go, well, see, we dispatched that wrong because of this reason? At the dealer, I had it set up pretty good where it's like they knew who was strong at certain things. So they kind of tried to keep dispatching that kind of work, what you're good at, right? I'd like to do drivability and electrical. So I got a lot of drivability and electrical. I fixed it. They went out the door fixed. It was good. What would happen sometimes is when I would get backed up and they would, kick it to anybody in the shop. I didn't mind if the guy came over and said, hey, I got one doing this. Sure. Yeah. Look at this. Look at that. I wasn't always going to be that guy that was like, screw you. I'm not going to help you. Right. Because I want to see that customer's car get fixed. But more times than not, it went south when somebody didn't bother to come over and ask me. They just, it's got a rough idle. Let's tune it up then. Let's give it the old BG and some spark plugs and some ignition wires and an update. And then it comes back next week and the EGR, it's got a code in it, right? And it's still running exactly the same as the way as before. Well, guess who gets to do the EGR? My hand goes up, right? Me. So all that gravy that they did last week, gone. I can't sell that now. I'm just going to do the EGR valve. So too many times workflow is not dispatched properly to avoid this kind of scenario happening, right? So that's just what I always found, is that it was, too many people don't advocate properly. And I guess at the end of the day, then I came to the conclusion that I never wanted to see an advisor make as much as a tech, because if neither one is advocating, right? If we're just in it for the money, then I wanted to see the most money go to the person with the most invested, training, tooling, right? But at the end of the day, it's not about really somebody should make more than someone else. It's we all have to be advocates, and if you're an advocate for the customers and you're doing right by them, then you should be paid well for that. And it shouldn't matter then if you're paid less or more. You should just be paid whatever makes you happy with being paid with that. I think for me is how I can live. I don't want to know if my manager's making more than me. I just know that I want to get paid enough to do my job and like to come to work and want to advocate for my customer.
Yeah, as long as I can cover my expenses, I don't really care. I mean, that's not my goal in this. It is, obviously, I'm here to make a living, but I'm not, I want to be able to enjoy what I do. I want to be able to feel good about what I do and feel, like I'm improving something for somebody.
I want to be proud of it, right? I want to be proud that I chose this profession. I want to get past the stereotypes that have been haunting us for decades, forever, right? So if and part of being able to do that, because I'm not the most, like Eric, you talked about, you struggle emotionally with, you get emotionally invested in their problem. See, for me, I don't know what it is or why. That's never been a case. I almost come across as too crass or jaded, because
never.
I don't really, so your transmission's going to cost $5,000. Okay. Do you want us to go ahead with that or not? I just can't get I understand it. $5,000 is not a drop in the bucket for a lot of people. It really is not. It's a substantial investment in that vehicle. And, $5,000 might mean next year they go without a vacation, or $5,000 might mean that they, the kids don't go into a couple sporting events next year, right? It's serious stuff. But I've never been one of those where it's been able to separate it and say, let's just try and Band-Aid that for you. It's just the cut and dried for me is it's like the right way to do it is the right way to do it. And I'm sorry that it costs so much. I'm not in control of that. And do you want to get started on it, or, do you want to have some time to think about it, but I got to get another car in? That's just the way it's the way emotionally I am with it. I've always been that way. I don't know why that is. I just think you've all heard me say it. It's just business. It's not personal.
Oh, no. And when I say empathize, I don't necessarily mean I'm going to emotionally discount every job. I get yelled at because I don't. Right. It's, you guys have heard it mentioned. I'm the full sender. Because, but it's, I want to do it properly. If, I will go sometimes overboard on stuff, well, this could break. I've had a lot of these break. We should probably be looking at doing this.
Yep.
And we're working around trying to incorporate that without, here's a 200-pound boulder that we're going to throw at you. And trying to find that happy medium of what's reasonably likely that we're going to have to replace and what isn't. I would never compromise quality or compromise safety to meet a price point. I mean, the price is the price.
Sure.
Can I knock shop supplies off ticket? Maybe.
Yeah.
If it's a single mother with no brake pedal, am I going to put a set of brake pads in there to get her safely down the road? Probably. If I have a car come in that is losing air faster than my compressor can put it out of the tire, if I have a used tire I can throw on there, maybe.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not going to be a total, I'm not going to be a scumbag about it, but I'm also not going to set the precedent that I'm going to lay down and just Band-Aid open heart surgery every time it comes in. You know, extenuating, there's always going to be those extenuating circumstances.
Sure.
But,
Absolutely.
you know, as a rule, I don't, you know, I'm not going to play the price shopper. My price is my price, and that's my price. This is what it is. What would you have me do?
So I think what we've come to the conclusion of is that too many times what we see happening is the advisor is making the assumption that the customer will not or cannot afford the proper repair. And I think that's what I took away from Cecil's when I was at ASTE, is that you can't make that assumption ever. There's no point in it being in the conversation of you assuming that they can or won't. You have to give it to them.
You present the job. Yeah. They will tell you if they can afford it or not.
Yeah.
You present the job. The customer will tell you whether they can afford it or not. And that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
That's what they're asking you for.
Exactly. That's what they brought it to you for.
If they knew how to evaluate their own car, what the hell are they doing at your shop for?
Yeah. When you assume you make an ass out of you and me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the whole thing comes down to less, you know, I think what I really look at with, especially this past week with my experiences, both with people at the front counter and the back shop, is if we all worry less about whether the front counter makes more money or the back shop makes more money, and we all just did our damn jobs the correct way, and we all just advocated to the customer, maybe, just maybe, the thing wouldn't be so complicated.
The money would make itself.
Yeah. Yeah. If we all just, I don't care what the guy at the front counter is making. He doesn't care what I make. If we evaluate the vehicles properly in the back shop, that's our job. Evaluate them, which means we have to be accurate.
Yep.
We can't put our advisors in a position where they're selling things that aren't going to fix the car.
That's exactly it. Test, don't guess.
Right? We have to be accurate. And the advisor needs to present the issues that we found. If everybody just does their job, I don't think for all of us at the end of the day it would matter. I don't think I would care.
No, do your job to the absolute best of your ability.
I don't care right now
what
the advisors at my place make. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you what, if we could get to a level where maybe we were doing a little bit better at not making decisions for customers, I would take that almost 0% of care and it would go to absolute zero.
Well, right. And that's, you know, it can't be, the focus can't be on, you know, making the absolute most we can. It's got to be on doing the best possible job we are capable of doing. That's it. That is our job.
100%.
Yeah, that's going to clash with some coaching ideals.
I don't care.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm with you on it.
I've never seen a coach fix a car.
This is exactly truth. Exactly.
I mean,
truth.
If they, hey, I got a freaking Power Stroke and a BMW that are absolute basket cases. So if any coaches are out there listening and you know my job better, I'd love to have you by the shop.
Yeah.
We could probably get you about $50 an hour if you can get these two cars fixed in a day. Mm-hmm. But I don't see it happening.
Yeah. So is that kind of what we take away from this, guys? Is that it's more about if you're going to put it into a little box, we've got to advocate more than we've got to be concerned with who's getting paid, right? It's more about the advocating for the customer, not what are you getting paid, you know, and who's getting paid more. So
why does it matter? At the end of the day, why does it matter?
Yeah. It was a topic that it got a lot of legs, it got a lot of traffic, a lot of people had some pretty strong
ideas. I noticed towards the end, it was,
and it's something that I waited a couple weeks to kind of think about it because I talked with a mutual friend last night, Mr. Dutch, 2 nights ago, pardon me, and posed him the question real quick, and he's like, "Well, you got to look at it this way." He says, "Like a tech is just pretty much a blunt tool." And he says, you can do the best DVI in the world, but if you don't have anybody to sell it, then you don't have anything. And then said, They don't come in though for what the advisor can make them feel like. They come in because they need their car repaired. So it's a teamwork thing, right? We need a service writer, and the service writer needs a competent tech, and it's a partnership that gets strained a lot of the time. And I've had some issues with lots of them in my career, and sometimes it make me want to pull my hair out and get, really. But that was in my flat rate days. Now, it doesn't. I don't get too stressed. It's just a situation of like, the only thing that stresses me now is overpromising on delivery times and, setting us up for failure by saying, oh yeah, you can bang out that 10-hour job by lunchtime. Like I'm not cool with that. But I don't.
Lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to let that go.
Right. But I don't,
I've had to let that go because I'll always have too many cars that I can't get done before the end of the day.
But now that now that I'm not in a situation where I've got to sell in order to earn a paycheck, the advisor is now much more, it's a partnership than it was a me versus them. So,
well, there's got to be a synergy between the front and the back for it to run efficiently. The better the understanding, the better the relationships, the better the communication, the better the overall situation is.
Amen.